Now we're going to move up to the sort of final piece in the telecom side of the jigsaw and look at the access network. So the next session we've got coming up is our operator CDN mobile telco cable and satellite session. We slightly tweaked things from the June one, where we were a little too focused on specifically wireless and non-fixed telecoms, but we've broadened things out a little bit. Hopefully we've got our panelists on board, so let me just check. Xavier, are you out there?
Yeah, I'm here, Dom. Good to be here today.
Excellent. The technology's working, the branding's in, I can see it sliding in with virtual or real backgrounds, however it's done. And Jonathan, are you out there too?
I'm here. It's going dark, Dom, but we're all good.
Good, excellent. Well, you're the same side of the water as me, at least. Yes, it's our pending lunch break is going to be something near my late dinner time. But anyway, and finally we have Elke. Elke, are you out there?
Hey, I'm here. Nice to meet you guys.
Excellent. Okay. So what I'd like to do is just whip along, get you to just briefly introduce yourselves, and then we'll get stuck into some very broad questions about the access space. So Xavier, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Sure. So my name is Xavier. I run the business development team here at Broadpeak. I'm basically in charge of a mid and long-term relationship with partners and with customers, and we look at new trends that are impacting basically content delivery networks. We are a provider of technology when it comes to CDN personalization, and today I hope to be able to offer some perspective based on the various deployments we have worldwide.
Cracking. Jonathan, can I hand it to you?
Yeah, thanks, Dom. I can't believe it's been 8 years since I last spoke at one of these events, and many thanks for inviting me back today. It's great to be back with you and amongst such distinguished company. Current venture, it's still operating under wraps, so hence a little bit cagey, but essentially what we're looking to do is address the current challenge of what I see as an overly centralized data center and congested peering infrastructure, and to build out the next generation of edge infrastructure. I define that as building deep edge data center and hosting capability for the bare metal infrastructure platform and so on. But building this out at the very point of intersect with the next generation access networks, be that 5G, fiber to the home, fixed wireless, and so on. And the second point is about recognizing that edge is very different and making this ultra low latency environment accessible and consumable in a way that's relevant to the CDN operators and the associated ecosystem via software-defined service edge. So still operating under wraps, although I guess watch this space.
Fantastic, excellent. Elke, please.
Hey, I'm Elke Hungenaert. I work for Cinemedia. For those who don't know Cinemedia, we're actually a spin-off from Cisco's video business unit. And basically, we are, you could say, a combination of what used to be Scientific Atlanta, Barconet, Inlet Technologies, Arroyo. The video network business unit in Cinemedia, we help service and content providers around the world to deliver, protect, monetize video content. So we're trusted by top satellite, DTH, cable, telco, DT, operator, broadcasters, and media companies. So if you look at the portfolio that we bring, you're called video network because we do the core video processing, which basically includes everything end to end, from where the content originates to the compression, all the way up to packaging, do the ad insertion, do the live VOD and recording workflows, and deliver it all the way up to the players. Okay, perfect. So I'm going to start off with quite a broad question. So in the access networks, what are the main challenges that you see these access networks facing with content delivery? I'm going to keep sweeping from left to right. So I'm going to start that with Xavier. Xavier.
Okay, that's a good place to start, I think, Dom. I think when it comes to access networks, you need to remember that they were built with contention in mind, right? So when a service provider sells you a high bandwidth service, you typically have probably about 5% of that is actually guaranteed, right? So with this in mind, I think one of the biggest challenges is the high concurrency event, right? When you have a lot of people watching the same content or different content at the same time, this is when your networks are going to struggle to deliver everything, simply because you will find bottlenecks along the way, right? So I think for me, The concurrent capacity remains a challenge today. It's obviously getting better with fiber and with some of the new topologies. We've seen AT&T, I think earlier in the week or last week, it was actually, everything's blending a bit, retiring DSL, right? So they're retiring this legacy technology, they're opening it with more bandwidth, but I think today the concurrency remains still a challenge. So for CDNs, it's how can I deliver so many streams to so many users at the same time? Dom, I think you're on mute.
I have to unmute myself. So, talk to us a little bit about some of the challenges that you help your customers deal with in the access space.
You asked a question to me, Dom?
Yes, sorry, I jumped the order there.
Sorry, you dropped out for a, no, you dropped out for a
dropped out the critical moment, Dom.
Yeah, I wasn't sure if you referenced Jonathan or me. So I think if you look at it from an operator standpoint, in the end, it's about how do you gain consumers and how do you keep them happy, right? So it's about how do you make sure that they get the quality of experience that they're expecting. I mean, a consumer today, they expect to be always on. If they want to watch video, they want to see it when they want, where they want, and on which device that they want. And that all depends on what are they watching on and what's the access network that they're getting that particular stream on. So as Xavier pointed out, of course, I think if you look at the pandemic, what we've seen there, it's, I mean, we've seen much more people at home. They had much more free time. So we did not only see that the streaming capacity went up, but we also saw peaks that could go pretty high. And especially when we go look at, even though the live sports were canceled or put on hold for a period of time, live news events, for example. So you had peaks and you have more scaling issues. So you've seen, for example, some companies, some OTT providers that basically said, hey, during peak hours, we're going to reduce the bit rates because we need to guarantee the quality of experience for our end consumers. I would say that's we need technology that makes sure that quality of experience that they expect, that we can deliver it. Then I would say, secondly, if you have consumers that are happy, then as an operator, how can you monetize it? How can you have a business model and an ROI that actually makes sense? And then thirdly is if you need to provide that many, I mean, there's also more content needs and on more screens and more access networks. So how can you control the cost of that as an operator? That's, to me, these are the three key areas that they are looking for, technologies that can give them solutions that make sure that they can meet their business goals.
Perfect. And Jonathan, so talk to us a little bit about what's actually emerging in the access network space. You've obviously had a very broad, over the 10 years or so I've known you, you've had a very broad range of experiences across all sorts of different access technologies. What are the evolving, obviously 5G's on the tip of everyone's tongue at the moment, but there are other technologies emerging as well. Give us a big picture about what's emerging in the access space at the moment.
Yeah, and we've been looking at this, and I would say past 10 years or so, Dom, but more recently in kind of startup mode, doing our due diligence on the market, and there's a lot of activity, and some of the, I guess some of the challenges that Elke and Xavier have highlighted there are the very reason we're actually sort of looking and focusing on what I'd call the kind of the next generation of access networks, be that 5G, fiber to the home, fiber to the prem, fixed wireless. I think in these markets, and these are our findings over the last sort of 6 months, and clearly we're taking a more of a sort of UK, European centric view. I believe that the US is somewhat different, but largely fiber to the home penetration is still pretty low, sadly, particularly in the UK, where it's sort of 10 to 15%, and the uptake is somewhat less than that. 5G is on the horizon, but for all intents and purposes, effectively stalled. And I think some of the other access technologies, be that fixed wireless or sort of small cell, is used as a kind of fill in for densification or for more marginal marginal rural use cases. I would say it's not by accident that we've actually looked at the market and sort of seen that, okay, a lot of the legacy access networks, be that DSL in the UK, there's massive penetration. However, there's some inherent challenges of working with old school technology, and not least the stranglehold that the present incumbent has on the market. So our focus is very much looking at the fiber to the home markets, fiber to the home access initially. And that actually brings quite a lot of benefit, not least in terms of performance. I'm not going to mention the amount of bandwidth or gigabit capable. Dom, I know that's one of your challenges that you have. Why do I need that much? But it's a matter of performance and ultra low latency, and I believe this, working in this way and having the ability to actually disaggregate the access market, and essentially, I think it was on the previous panel talking about sort of gaming access services to the home. I mean, that is infinitely possible in this new market. So I think we remain positive, but also with one eye on the the current lion's share. 80% of the market plus is still in legacy access environments.
And we've seen, I've seen various news reports about the traffic intensification during the last sort of 8 to 10 months over COVID and so on. But interesting, I mentioned this actually at the last Content Delivery Summit. I dialed into the Internet Service Providers Association, which I've been a sort of long-term periphery member. It's probably the best way to describe it. I dialed into one of their discussions about the impacts that COVID were having on the ISP sector. And I was quite surprised that there was very little conversation about traffic, actually. Most of the discussion was about churn and their concerns that people were going to stop subscribing for businesses because they were going to relocate. Well, effectively, they were disaggregating their consumers. They were all moving to homes and working from home. So the business ISP services, which might have only been 20% of the volume of their actual traffic, were still generating 80% of their profitability. But actually, a lot of that has moved back to the home. Now, my gut feeling is that one-to-many OTT services, the sort of services that many of us distribute, probably were already at home. There's some business TV, like obviously everyone's fanatically watching Content Delivery Summit and so on, that goes on. But I wonder how much that traffic is really moving around. Elke, you mentioned it a moment ago. How much are you seeing this traffic moving as people are relocating to work from home or working in different ways with the pandemic?
So when people work from home or with the pandemic, what we see is actually there's really a growth. So we need to prepare for all the spikes that are actually coming on just as well as because of the pandemic, we see much more the need for remote operations, for example. So where in the past it was you had your teams on the ground, so to speak, as an operator. Now it's about how can I really operate my edge, my CDN network, my content delivery network. How can I operate that from the home? And how can I make sure that my business continuity is actually guaranteed? Now, from our perspective, it's much more about, it's not the work, so we're not talking on teleconferencing or video conferencing from the edge perspective, but we're in the media and entertainment business, so to speak. So it's about how can we deliver the media that people need. Our customers are actually media companies. How can we make sure, or service providers, cable providers, how can they make sure that their CDN operations remain? And they have a consumer base which is growing, they have more peaks, and they want their personnel to operate in the cloud. So what we've seen happening during the pandemic is we see a lot more interest for getting, for example, cloud native applications out. So if you look at a traditional CDN, you have a multi-tier architecture, which is very traditionally, but they're like, all right, one thing I need to make sure is when I peak, now I need to offload maybe to my multicast network because I'm a telco provider and I have a multicast network. And if that one is congested, maybe I need to offload to a public CDN provider. So they're looking, on one hand, they're looking at how can I offload my media, deliver it to the multitude. They look at it from a holistic approach. So they look at, I have my private CDN, but how can I leverage all of the networks that are available to me so my consumers are happy and they can watch whatever they want to watch. That's one thing. The second thing is about, I have if I have data center capacity, why should I prepare for the peaks? I just need to make sure that my steady state situation is on, and maybe I need to containerize my caches and spin them up whenever there is capacity. So I can just use compute and bandwidth when I really need it, and then free it up again for other means. And then last but not least, we also see people saying, hey, my core business is actually video delivery. My core business is maybe not managing an edge CDN. So we see a lot of interest from more operators that say, hey, Cinemedia, if you, or other companies, if you could deliver this as a managed service to me, if you build it and operate it, then let us run our video service on top of that. So those are the three angles of the cloud. We saw it coming before the pandemic, but I think the pandemic was just an accelerator for all of this.
Interesting, interesting. And you mentioned my favorite word. Those of you that know me will know that multicast is my secret kink. And that's a segue to lead over to a discussion actually I had with Xavier a little while ago about Multicast ABR. Now I know that Multicast ABR has been emerging rapidly. It was really originally conceived of as a way to deal with mobile and so on. But Xavier, tell us a little bit about Multicast ABR and your views on where Multicast ABR is at the moment.
Sure. Yeah, I think Multicast ABR is always an interesting topic, right? Because you're combining the power, the scalability of multicast, right? Which is the best way to deliver content on a managed network. I think that's clear. This has been established 15 years ago with IPTV, right? So multicast is very much the best way to deliver live content on a managed network with the versatility of ABR, right? So ABR, you deliver it to any device, any screen. You don't have to worry about the end device playing the content, and combining the two, I think, gives you something very unique, right? Something in the market, if I was to look at, something that basically enabled this transition away from what is the legacy transport stream-based technology, so your old IPTV, your DTH deployments on satellite, moving away to full ABR solutions, right? And Multicast ABR basically gives you this scalability that today is preventing networks to switch to full ABR. Because if you were to do a full ABR with unicast, you would end up transitioning a very large numbers of connections that are today delivered with broadcast technologies onto unicast, and that would basically be a big problem for the network. So with Multicast ABR, what you do is you transport ABR streamed throughout the network using multicast, and then within the home you convert this multicast back to unicast. So there's a little bit of software running in one of your CPE. There might be a set-top box, there might be a gateway that takes multicast in from the network and then converts it back for your end devices, and is completely transparent for your end device. So you might be watching a football game on your iPad, being fed with a multicast stream to your gateway, and then a gateway sending you the content, and you would not even know that you were playing the content with multicast.
So this leads to an interesting question about deployment of services such as Multicast ABR and so on. Mm-hmm. Jonathan, when we were talking before the show, you mentioned about, you talked about NFV and SDN and using technologies like that to orchestrate service. And we're obviously going to focus in on those this afternoon in a panel session that's specifically on them. But in the access network context, are you seeing technologies like that widely deployed yet, or are they much like the sort of broad topic of edge? In my personal opinion, it's a little bit pre-market in its truest sense. Where do you think these sort of the capability to roll something like Multicast ABR out into an access network in a software-defined way? Are we there yet? Is it coming? What do you view the market? How do you view the market?
Interesting question, Don. Thanks for that. And you know, what we obviously for our own purposes, we've been looking at, you know, the sort of the next generation of network, and indeed we've selected and chosen to run, you know, NFV for some of our, you know, virtual broadband network gateway services that we're looking to deploy, and indeed the sort of software-defined networking or software-defined WAN or sort of SD-WAN capability is kind of integral to this seamless service edge I talked about, shifting workloads around across the network. And I think part of that, the kind of due diligence that we've done, we've seen that there are a lot of players now actually sort of moving into the space. I think they're probably the sort of the small, more agile players in the market. You know, there's plenty of providers of NFV and SDN or SD-WAN type solutions out there. I think the market is somewhat muddied, and particularly in the access network, by the marketing power of the big guys as well, because they're actually sort of rebadging and pushing their sort of monolithic chassis-based services still, but then with a kind of software-defined or an abstracted layer over the top of that. But there's actually, you know, some of the due diligence and whether you'd actually put your core network or your access network infrastructure on an emerging player. There are some really interesting guys out there doing virtual routing, virtual BNG, as we've talked about there, all of which is available. And you know, you know, we're actually going to be testing that in our network, hopefully over the next 3 to 4 months.
Perfect. So, Elke, coming to you, this idea of rolling out services and so on, how necessary is it? Our current caching approach is capable of serving the traffic that's being demanded. Is there a need for what I've always termed higher service velocity in terms of how fast organizations can roll out new services, or is the status quo stable and good enough as it is today?
I think we see then a growing demand and higher peaks. I think if you look at all types of forecasting reports, like 80% or over 80% of all the internet traffic will become video. So I think if you look at CDNs today, and if you look, there will be an ever-growing need to move deeper into the edge and to have more edge intelligence. For example, edge cache nodes that intercommunicate. If you look at 5G networks, for example, the 5G increases the bandwidth between the mobile handheld and the cell tower, but then all of a sudden your backhaul capacity can become a bottleneck. So that means if you look at popular content, you need to get that popular content as deep in the edge as possible. To offload or to make sure that you don't move your scaling issue to another piece into the network. And that's why even if you look, you could optimize your access network, but you need to look at it from a holistic approach, like how do you get the original content all the way up to the devices and make sure that there's no quality impact. So I think there will be continuous optimization on you could say the algorithms for doing efficient caching, also intercommunication between all the caches, share the resources, and then use the analytics to really balance your whole network. You could balance both on the networking side as well as if you know it's a video workflow on top of it. You could use all these analytics to really make your network very intelligent. So even if you say, okay, now my network capacity is really, it's done, you could start doing something on the video application layer. You could say, hey, I don't offer my 4K profile anymore, for example, which reduces your network capacity and you can handle additional peaks. So I think there will be continuous wave of innovations coming to serve the increasing demand for more content, to have and to have more and better video quality of experiences.
So this next question is actually going to probably be one that I'm going to point to Xavier first, but I might well come back to you as well, Elke. So as you deploy technologies into these access networks, what are the environmental challenges that you face? Do you have to convince them to deploy new CPE to support new technologies, or are we at a stage where virtualization has established environments within access networks where you can actually turn up with a soft solution today and deploy it into an existing an existing fabric, or do you have to always convince operators to some extent, at least, to provide new environmental technologies to support your solutions? Xavier.
Yep, it's I think we've seen a lot of evolution, right? So if you look at the CDN market over the last, I don't know, 5-10 years, it used to be based on appliances, then we moved to the off-the-shelf hardware, moved to virtualization, and now containerization. What is interesting would be to look at the global set of deployments. If you look at all the private CDNs in the world, what is the percentage of caches that are actually containerized, virtualized, or running still on dedicated hardware? And what I'm getting at with this is the fact that a lot of the capacity today still runs on bare metal, right? Simply because you get the best possible performance out of bare metals. And CDN is a very heavy application. You do a lot of heavy lifting, getting content from the storage, streaming it out to the device. So a lot of the core, at least, deployments are being done with bare metal deployments still today. If you look at the larger CDN, it's still the case. What is interesting, though, is once you talk to established service providers who have already maybe multiple tiers of CDN, when they look to go deeper into the edge, this is where there's a requirement typically to run in virtualized environment or containerized environments, right? And I think this is a clear step. Deploying images or deploying caches in 10 or 20 POPs across a country is easy. Doing it in 100 or 1,000 POPs requires the automation. And this is where having the containerized functions, being able to run, your CDN load on Kubernetes, for example, or on VMware. VMware is still very popular with a lot of the service providers today. This is where it makes a difference. And then you can adapt the load depending on demand. You have this idea of elastic CDN. Again, not a new idea, something we've been talking about for a while. But I think in the current situation, with higher peaks of live demand, right, where you have a lot of people tuning at the same time, watching content, and it's becoming more difficult to predict as well. This is where having something very flexible gives you a better total cost of ownership, because you're not dedicating hardware, you're not using hardware for just one function. You're basically using it where you need it and when you need it. And that makes a big difference at the end.
Elke, I assume you kind of concur with those points. Are there any nuances you'd like to add?
No, I think, as Xavier says, there's the reality of the day, which is still a lot of bare metal, but we are ready for what's coming, and our operators will get ready. We all have to move. You could say where the cloud was already there in the core, it will spread towards the edges. There will be more and more elasticity in the whole end-to-end solution, including the CDN. So that means spin up or only spin up the capacity when you need it, and make sure that you can operate it from the cloud.
Okay, cool. And I've got one last question which came in from the floor. I'm going to slightly version it because there was a sort of request to name vendors, and I'd like to avoid doing that today. But broadly, Jonathan, for you, the question was asking about bolstering efforts for edge to last mile connectivity and how that could best be achieved. Have you got any sort of general points on that you could make towards how to best bridge the edge to the last mile connectivity?
Yeah, and probably shouldn't take too much about this, Dom, for obvious reasons. But certainly, I mean, we've been spending a lot of time in this space at the moment. And, as you know, working with a startup environment is very much an exercise in herding cats, getting the content distributors, the CDNs is easier to say, and the ISPs to talk. And, clearly, if you can provide the infrastructure and the capability to host content and indeed edge compute, at the deeper edge, then that is one thing. However, the challenge is to then break that traffic out and then present that to the ISPs. The bigger challenge that I see at the moment is the reticence with the traditional ISPs, in that their IP edge and their peering edge tend to be slightly different places and more geared to the older school regionalized data center infrastructure. So that's something that we're working tirelessly on at the moment, is to try and overcome that and actually, in effect, break into the side of the ISP networks, because absolutely there are performance benefits to be derived if you're able to do that.
Brilliant. Well, listen, these panels are fast and furious today. We've actually run over unbelievably, and I feel like we've only just started the conversation. Yeah. And in fact, I just want to chip in an idea. One of the things we're obviously looking for from all of the audience is feedback on different things we can do with Content Delivery Summit. It did occur to me that what might be quite fun is, as we organize these things, to see if we can have a secondary date when I get each of the panels together and we invite audience members to come in and we have a much more open-ended discussion for an hour or something specifically with each of the panel groups. So if you think that's a good idea, let me know by feedback, or let us know however you need to. I can even do fun and funky things like put my email address up so you can email me directly. So do let us know, give us all the feedback you can on the structure and so on. We've had a whistle-stop morning going from submarine fiber all the way through to the edge of the access network. So really, in terms of the telecoms and the underpinnings of the content delivery environment, I think we've touched a little bit on almost everything I can think of across the space, but we just will never have time to go properly into depth in sessions like this. So make sure you link in with us. Make sure you get in touch with Xavier, Elke, Jonathan, if you've got further questions for them. I'd just like to say a quick thank you to the panel there. So Xavier, thank you very much. It's been great to have you on.
Pleasure.
Elke as well, thank you. Thank you very much for your time and joining us today. And Jonathan too, it's been great to have you with us.
Thanks a lot, Dom.